Hey there. A common mistake I see beginners make is that they don't put enough comments in their code. And it's understandable because when I first started coding and I learned about code comments, I was always wondering why would you want to comment your code, because you can just look at the code and figure out what it's doing. But as I got better at programming, as I gained more experience, I started to appreciate comments even more. And that's because code comments are like messages from the past. It's like the previous developer is giving you a note about his or her code, and just by reading it, just by reading one simple comment, you can understand what a code is doing, and it can save you a lot of time because oftentimes code can be really complex. Code comments are also like messages to the future. You're telling a future developer about your code, and oftentimes that future developer is going to be you. You're going to be sending yourself in the future some reminders of why you did certain things in your code. And so in this video, I'm going to be talking about why code comments are useful, when to use them, and I'll give an example of how to use them in C. All right, let's discuss. All right, my name is Henrik, and I'm here to teach you how to program your own applications, stress less, build more, save time, and improve lives. And before we begin, I would like to mention that I do have a free guide called my Personalized Finance App Programming Guide. It's a free PDF, and it's a 12-step guide teaching you how to take your credit card transactions and then categorize them into different budget categories so you know how much you're spending in these different budget categories. And it's a fun application that you can program, and if you have no coding experience, don't worry, you can just follow the steps in that guide. And if you download it and pay attention to what it says, you'll definitely learn some fundamental programming concepts. All right, so why are code comments useful? In my previous video, I talked about how the hardest part of your job is going to be understanding your code base. And that's because your code base is going to be given to you by your company. It's going to be a really huge code base, and you don't know where to start when you're first given it. When it's first given to you, you don't know where to start. And a lot of times when you look at the code, they also don't give you documentation a lot of the times. So when you look at the code, the only thing that you can really go by is by asking someone else some questions, or you just start looking at some of the comments. And the code comments are really, in my experience, I found them to be really helpful in understanding what's going on. They give you like a snippet of understanding, and then based on that snippet of understanding, you can start to grow your understanding from that small snippet. So code comments have been my best friend when I started working at my companies. And there was one time that I was given a code base, and the code base was written by developers who were no longer at the company. And I had no documentation, and then they just gave this to me and they said, Henrik, we need you to take over this code base. It's all yours, and every time we want something implemented in this application, we want you to do it. And so the only thing that I knew about this program was how to run it and then see what it does when I do certain things. And it's a GUI application, and the code comments were really helpful for me. And these code comments were left by developers who had left the company. And sometimes you even get code bases where there are developers who are working in that code base as well, but they're not going to touch the whole code base. And there's going to be parts in that code that were written by developers 10, 15 years ago, and they're no longer at the company. So even though you have a code base that other people are working on too, there are parts of it where those code comments that were left by developers from a long time ago, they become really useful for you to help you understand the code. Since code comments were really useful for me, I often, when I implement new features, if it's appropriate, I do add my own comments there to help future developers who are looking at my code as well. And I also do this because I think about the people on my team, because when there's one code that I work on, a code base that other developers are also working on, and then I submit it for code review, and when they look at the code review, they have no clue what's going on. So that's when I would leave some comments in there in anticipation of questions that they would have. And so sometimes I put code comments for people who are currently working with me on my team, so they know why I'm coding something in a certain way. And so it's also not just for the future, but it's also for your present team. And lastly, code comments are really useful for yourself. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of times you're going to code something for 1 month. You're going to code one feature that your company wants you to do, and then you're going to leave that code, and then you're going to start working on a different feature or a different task. And then maybe like 3 months later, someone's gonna ask you a question about that code. And when you go back and look at the code, you don't have any comments. then you have to like spend a day trying to understand what you're trying to do. And it seems kind of weird, but once you start coding for your job, you're going to be shifting your focus a lot of times in your job. So those code comments that you left before are really helpful for you. All right, now that we know that code comments are really useful, the next question is going to be when to use them. And there's going to be a lot of debate online and among developers, when is it too much and when is it too little? So you really need to talk with your team and with your company, what is the coding convention you guys are going to use? Because if developers are commenting their code in different ways, it can get confusing and frustrating because you're all going to be looking at the same code. So it's really important to be on the same page. And a lot of times the simplest thing to do is just to look at how other people have coded something or how other people have commented their code, and then you just copy that. And then that's probably the safest thing that you're gonna do. But if you're not gonna be working with anyone, you can comment the code however you want because you're the only one who's gonna be looking at it. So although there's no universal law or standard or rule on how to comment your code, the key idea here is code readability. Code readability is just this idea of writing, designing, and organizing your code in such a way that another developer can look at your code, read it, and understand it. Alright, there are three main ways that another developer can use to try to understand your code. And the first one is going to be obviously the program itself, the naming of the variables, the naming of the functions, and the logic. Just by looking at your code, that's how they can understand your code and the way you organized your code. And then the second way is going to be documentation. If you have documented your code through like a README file, then another developer can look at that README and understand more about your code that way. And then the third way that another developer can understand your code is by looking at the comments. So when you have comments in your code, that's how that will help them a lot in understanding and being able to read your code. Alright, so there's going to be two extremes when it comes to commenting. It's going to be too little, and then there's going to be too much. And I've talked to other people about this, and they've said that some of them have said they don't want to put a lot of comments in there because the program should be designed and organized well enough so that you don't need to use comments. And that's more on the too little side, I think. And I agree with them that you shouldn't put a comment for every single line, especially if you're just commenting something that the code is already doing in its logic. You shouldn't put a code comment there because it can be redundant. So you don't want redundant code comments in there. But at the same time, just looking at the naming and looking at the logic, that's not enough sometimes to understand the code. Sometimes having just a simple line of code comment can go a long way in terms of helping them to understand the code. Alright, so the people who are on the extreme where it's too little, they would say you should only comment your code when it's doing something rare or unusual. Otherwise, you should have like no comments at all in your code. And I think I would agree with that you should only put code comments for rare and unusual cases, but you should also put it in complex cases. And what I mean by that is if your code is doing something that maybe it would take hours or maybe even days to understand, you should add in some code comments there so that someone can really understand your code much faster. Maybe it would only take them 15 minutes instead of a whole day of trying to go through the logic and then figure out what to do. So that's when I would say you should add in some comments there so that you could save people some time. Alright, so my general rule is to comment code where the code is doing something that's not readily understandable or it is not really intuitive. Alright, I'm going to give you 5 examples of when I use a code comment. The first one is in constants. If it's non-intuitive for why this constant is a certain number, then I'm going to put in a code comment for other developers to know why I chose that number. The second one is going to be a design choice that is kind of rare. If I'm running some code and I'm realizing that it doesn't work with the hardware if I code it with a certain logic, but it works with the hardware if I use a different kind of logic, then I'll put that in comment like, I tried doing this and it didn't work with the hardware, so I used this kind of logic. So that's when I would use a code comment there to explain why I'm doing something in a certain way and why I'm using a certain design for that feature. Or the third one is data algorithm or data processing. And a lot of times you have a program that takes in data and then processes it. And there's going to be a lot of states, and there's going to be like a state machine on when does the data convert into this type of data, and then it converts to this type of data. So having some comments there to explain what's going on with the data can really help in someone in the future understanding that part of the code. And data algorithms, they can be kind of complex, so having those comments in there can really help out. All right, the fourth one is going to be references. Sometimes there's a piece of code that I wrote and it's not really understandable why I chose that kind of code. I would link a reference, and that would explain, or like an online reference that would explain more why I coded it that way. And then the last one is to do. Basically, a lot of times in code, sometimes you have a temporary code and you can't, while you're working on a product, you can't fix it right away because of a time constraint, and you want to fix it not this week, maybe fix it next month because it's a low priority bug. So then you put in a to do comment, and then you're telling people in the future that this is just temporary and you need to fix it at some point. So a lot of developers use it, and sometimes it's looked down upon, but it's important when you need to prioritize certain features. All right, so now that you know why you need to use code comments and when to use them, I'm going to show you how to use them in actual code, and I'm going to do this in C. And of course, you need to talk to your company or your team how you guys are going to do code comments together. But I'm going to talk about the coding conventions that I used in university that I was taught, and also the coding conventions I learned from my jobs. All right, so now let's go to some code. All right, so here we are in Visual Studio Code, and this is my program Fibonacci.c. It's the Fibonacci coding challenge, and you can watch my video about it where I code this, and you can see how I went through this and coded this and what does this program do. But in summary, it takes a number and it prints that number of the Fibonacci sequence. And I already have some comments in here. The things in green here are comments, and here actually this is actual real code, but I don't want it to say I'm in fib every time I run the function, so I commented it out. And this kind of comment is it's called an inline comment, and it's basically for commenting out just a line of code. But if you want to comment out more than a line of code, you use this. And you see how everything turned green? And that's because everything after this asterisk is going to be comments until it sees another asterisk and another slash. So only this part of the code is commented out, and these are commented out because it has the double slashes. But after that, you have the return here, and this is not commented. So let's remove this. This is for multi-line, but actually in university, what I learned was, so we should actually remove this because we shouldn't comment actual code. You should only have comments that explain what the code is doing. So I'm going to remove that. And see, I wrote this in my program before, and what I learned in university was you shouldn't comment your line like this, or you shouldn't put a comment there. You should comment it like this instead. And this is a more official way of commenting your code. And basically what this does, it tells you what this section is doing. See, if you look at the code, it's not really readily understandable about what last two is referring to. And that might be because I chose a bad name, but you don't understand what last two is referring to unless you watch my video. All right, so last two, what this function is referring to, see, this is why I wish I had written better comments, because I had to take some time to understand. Basically, last two is it's referring to the last two numbers, because I needed some sort of memory in my program, because a Fibonacci sequence, basically it takes the last two numbers and adds them to get the next number. So this last two, and you see that happening here. So the last two numbers are added together to get the nth number. So it's not F2, it should be, F2 is like a specific example. It's actually gonna be Fn, and we don't really need this print statement, it's just for debugging. So this is what I would do, and I would comment out, I would say this comment just tell myself in the future that this is an array that stores the last 2 numbers. Okay, I can put another comment that, put a comment there that this is the number that is returned. Yeah, let's convert this to the official way of commenting. Okay, so this is not really replacing F0 with F1. In this case, this is a special case when n is equal to 2. So it's actually Fn, and then this is Fn minus 1, and this is n minus 1, and this is n minus 2. Oops. And that's this section here is for the next calculation. So you can put a comment here saying updating. Okay, so those are inline comments. And this is an example of an algorithm. It's an algorithm, and it's hard to understand at first glance. So you need to add in some comments so that the developer can understand, the future developer can understand what is going on without thinking too much. And then here we can just say alternate. This is actually an alternate solution. All right, so this is I commented out that code because I just want to keep it just in case. But I also added a code comment so we know why this is there. Okay, now another kind of comment is going to be a function comment. So a function comment will look kind of like this. And it's a big block of comment. It's a multi-line comment, and basically you'll just have the title here. You'll have and then you'll have a description, and then the arguments, and then the return. So this is a basic outline. So here's a basic example of a function comment. Sometimes you see people do something like this, and then you have something like this. All right, so here's an example of how I would comment this code. Yeah, see, this part is pretty obvious, so I don't put any comments there. This piece of code actually has a lot of comments, I would say. I mean, look at that, it's all green. But I think if I was at my company, I wouldn't have this many comments. I'm just leaving these comments in there because this code is for teaching purposes. So I have all these comments in here so that someone's trying to learn how to code the Fibonacci coding challenge, these comments are really helpful for them. All right, so that's my video about code comments. I talked about why you should use code comments, why they're useful, and then when to use them, and then how to use them in C and in my program. I showed an example. And if you have any questions about code comments, feel free to let me know. If you're wondering if you're adding too many comments, or what are some other principles that you need to know about code comments, feel free to ask in the comment section, and then I'll get back to you. Also, I'd like to hear what are some of your opinions about code comments. Maybe you have your own framework or philosophies on how to add code comments. I'd like to hear more from you guys and hear what you have to say about that. And if you haven't downloaded it yet, I do have a free guide called My Personalized Finance App Programming Guide. If you need a project or you need an application that you want to build, this is a really fun one. I built it myself, and it was really fun to do, and it's a good opportunity to start using code comments and start practicing and getting better at programming. And you can download that in the link in the description. All right, thanks for watching. Thanks for making it to the end of this video. I really appreciate you. And I really appreciate that you take the time to listen to what I had to say. I hope it's really helpful and beneficial for you. If there's anything else that you want me to cover in a future video, please let me know so I can make better content for you. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace.